Hi everybody, my name is John Dupuis from York University, and I'll put my light on as well, because I am the I'm the what's faster than lightning talk. So I'm going to give a very quick digest of a talk I gave at OCAD-U for Open Access Week. Is Chris here? Yes, Chris is there. Thank you, Chris, for inviting me. And so basically I want to talk a little bit about predatory open access journals and maybe a kind of a different perspective on them. And my perspective is basically don't panic. So I like this particular quote by Lee Smolin, a physicist, and he said, his emphasis is on on concerning ourselves with the content of our research as opposed to the kind of little extraneous details about how many people cited it or where it was published. The thing we should worry about is the content of the research. And to get it back to a little bit to the open access, to the predatory side, there was a study published a few months ago, where the authors did a statistical analysis and tried to estimate the number of predatory open access articles in 2014. And the number they came up was probably much too high compared to better estimates. But one of the conclusions they drew from their analysis was that it's very likely most of the authors that published in those so-called predatory journals did it on purpose. They weren't tricked into publishing in those journals. They knew they were doing it explicitly with full knowledge that they were padding their CVs. And you can get into a lot of it's a very interesting study. You can get into a lot of details about why that was their rational choice in their situation, but that certainly would lead us to perhaps look a little bit differently at those kinds of publishers. So there's a lot of competing narratives in I guess the scholarly publishing world. One, no doubt, there are these journals that are not so wonderful, but there are also the big scholarly commercial and society publishers that aren't so wonderful either. And sometimes, the people that are doing the research aren't so wonderful. And you know what? Sometimes just because you're publishing in what's supposedly a high impact journal, that doesn't actually mean that your research, oops, did I just step on something? Publish in a fancy journal doesn't mean your research is better. And and of course then there's the issues with big deals and how the pricing structures are opaque and non-transparent. And a common refrain amongst the big publishers, the big commercial and society publishers, is that open access would be a good idea, but it's actually too hard to do in the real world because then we wouldn't be so fancy publishers anymore. And of course, a popular one. This is Cameron Nayland, one of my open access heroes. Basically, looking at the idea that this is again coming back to the beginning. It's all about what the research culture is about. A lot of the things we're seeing are being driven by flaws in the research culture, and so the researchers themselves are creating this kind of incentive environment that's encouraging people to do not so wonderful things. And so all those narratives are at least partially true. And you'll have your own, there's a bunch more. They're all at least partially true. But if someone, whenever I'm talking to someone and they really only want to talk about one of those narratives, I get a little suspicious. And so I'd rather concentrate on helping people make good decisions as opposed to kind of shaming bad decisions or making a big deal about things that are more at the margin of things. I'd rather help people make good decisions. And so here are some resources to help make people make good decisions, like DOAJ and a bunch of other things. The Think, Check, Submit website was launched recently by a bunch of publishers and other organizations. And that's kind of some guidelines to help people choose good publishing platforms and publishers. Carl has a very good document identifying and avoiding predatory publishers, a primer for researchers that has a lot of good suggestions. And there's a bunch of other of these libguides and other documents on making good choices as opposed to concentrating on what might be not so wonderful choices. And of course, now for something completely different, I like Walt Crawford's idea of reframing the discussion and thinking about predatory subscription publishers. And he has on that document, he has quite a long list of criteria where you would think, how you could identify predatory subscription publishers. So predatory publishers are really symptoms of a broken system. They're not the disease itself. And there's nothing wrong with treating the symptoms, but we shouldn't confuse treating the symptoms with treating the disease. That's it for me. Thank you.